The night was unusually quiet for the small town. Autumn winds carried the dry scent of falling leaves, and the narrow streets of Hollow Creek were mostly empty, save for the occasional dog barking at shadows. Just after midnight, a sudden crackling noise broke the silence. Within minutes, flames began to rise from the old Miller house at the edge of town, a house that had stood empty and decaying for nearly 2 decades. The locals often called it cursed, a place where children dared each other to step onto the rotting porch, and where adults avoided walking past after dark. Tonight, however, it was alive again, but not with laughter or whispers. It was burning. By the time the fire department arrived, the house was engulfed in orange fury. The wood, dry and brittle with age, fed the flames hungrily. Black smoke curled into the sky, visible across the sleepy town. Neighbors stood at a distance, murmuring about the blaze, clutching their coats tight against the chill. Some swore they heard screams. Others dismissed it as the house itself groaning under the fire's weight. The firefighters worked tirelessly, spraying torrents of water, trying to stop the fire from spreading to nearby trees. Within an hour, the inferno was under control. The once standing structure had collapsed inward, reduced to a smoking skeleton of charred beams and ash. As the firefighters moved through the wreckage to check for hotspots, one of them called out. His voice carried urgency. He had stumbled upon something strange among the ruins, an old chest, its surface scorched but intact, buried under broken planks. Carefully, he dragged it out. When he pried it open, expecting maybe old clothes or forgotten valuables, he found instead a leather-bound book, half burnt at the edges, but still readable. The fire captain frowned as he handed it to the police officer on scene. "Looks like a diary," he said grimly. "And not a recent one." Detective Aaron Blake, a man in his 40s with a reputation for noticing details others overlooked, was called to the site. He knelt by the chest, pulling on his gloves before picking up the diary. The leather was cracked. The smell of smoke clung to its pages, but the neat handwriting was unmistakable. He flipped to the first intact page. The date written was from 20 years ago, a girl's handwriting. The name at the bottom of the first entry made his heart pause. Emily Miller. Everyone in Hollow Creek knew that name. Emily was the teenage daughter of the Miller family, the same family who had lived in this house before it was abandoned. 20 years ago she had vanished without a trace. One night she was there. The next morning she was gone. No body was ever found. No solid leads uncovered. The case had been investigated, but ultimately went cold. Rumors flourished that she ran away, that she was kidnapped, that the house itself had swallowed her whole. But seeing her diary here, unearthed in the wreckage, raised more questions than answers. Detective Blake stood up, his jaw tight. He knew what this meant. The case was about to be reopened, and secrets buried for 2 decades were about to come crawling back to life. He looked at the officer beside him. "Bag it carefully. This could be the key we've been waiting for." Word spread quickly. By morning, the town was buzzing with talk of the fire and the discovery. In the small diner downtown, older residents exchanged theories over steaming cups of coffee. "I always said the family knew more than they let on," one woman muttered. "Poor girl didn't just vanish into thin air." Others were more cautious. "It's been 20 years. Sometimes the past should stay buried." Meanwhile, Detective Blake sat in his office at the precinct, the diary laid open on his desk. The first entry seemed innocent enough. Emily writing about her days at school, her friends, her love for sketching. But then as he turned the pages, a darker tone emerged. She wrote of feeling watched in her own home, of hearing whispers behind closed doors, of arguments that shook the walls late at night. One entry stood out. "I don't think I'm safe here anymore. Someone in this house doesn't want me alive." Blake leaned back in his chair, staring at the words. If Emily had written this days before she vanished, Then someone close to her, someone under the same roof, might have been responsible. The burned edges of the diary frustrated him. Parts of sentences were gone, whole paragraphs eaten away by flame, but enough remained to stir a chill inside him. He decided to visit the ruins again. The fire investigators were still combing through the wreckage for clues. "Any idea how it started?" Blake asked. The lead investigator shrugged. "Too early to say. Could be squatters. Could be electrical. But here's the thing. The place had no power running, which means most likely it was arson." Arson. Blake's mind spun. Someone had set fire to a house that had been abandoned for 2 decades. Someone who had a reason to destroy whatever was inside. And yet, ironically, instead of erasing the past, the fire had exposed it. The diary, hidden in the chest, had survived enough to speak again. That night Blake took the diary home. He sat at his kitchen table under the dim light, reading entry after entry. Emily described herself as lonely, suffocated by the strict rules of her father. She longed to leave Hollow Creek, to see the world beyond, but she was afraid. She wrote of her mother's silence, her brother's strange behavior, and her father's unpredictable temper. "They keep secrets from me," she wrote. "I hear them talking when they think I'm asleep. They stop when I walk into the room. Something is wrong here." Blake felt a knot in his chest. He thought of Emily at 16, writing these words, sensing danger yet unable to escape. Then he reached an entry dated 2 nights before her disappearance. The words were shaky, written in haste. "I found out something I shouldn't have. I don't know what will happen next. If anything happens to me, this diary will tell the truth." But the page after that was blackened, half the sentences lost. The last legible words made Blake's skin prickle. "I can't trust anyone in this house." The following pages were almost unreadable. Burned into ash, he slammed the diary shut, his mind racing. If this was Emily's warning, then her disappearance was no accident. Someone had silenced her, and now, 20 years later, that someone might still be out there. Sleep didn't come easy. All night, Blake replayed the case details in his head. The original investigation had interviewed the family, but nothing substantial came of it. Emily's father claimed she must have run away. Her mother barely spoke, fragile and nervous. Her brother was younger then, just 14. With no evidence, the police had closed the file, but this diary reopened every wound. By dawn, Blake had made up his mind. He called his captain and requested the old case files. The captain, though skeptical, agreed. "You're stirring ghosts, Aaron," he warned. "Be careful. People don't like their past being dug up." Blake only nodded. He knew this wouldn't be easy. The Millers had left town years ago after Emily's disappearance. The house had stood as a scar on Hollow Creek's memory, a reminder of a mystery unresolved. But now the diary gave the case new life. Someone had wanted it destroyed, and Blake was determined to find out who. That evening, he returned to the ruins one last time. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The house stood in silence, nothing but blackened timber and ash. He walked slowly, scanning the ground, and his boot nudged something metallic. Bending down, he picked it up. A small locket, half melted but still intact. When he pried it open, inside was a faded photo of Emily Miller, smiling in the way teenagers do when they think life is still full of promises. Blake's heart sank. He slipped the locket into his pocket. The night wind whistled through the ruins, and Blake felt a strange presence, as if the house itself still remembered. He whispered softly, "I'll find the truth, Emily. I promise." Far away, in the shadows of town, someone else was watching. A figure sat in a car, parked where the glow of the ruins could still be seen. The figure lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating hard eyes. They watched the detective with silent intensity before starting the engine and driving off into the night. The fire had awakened something buried. The diary had spoken again, and now the secrets of the Miller family were stirring, refusing to stay dead. The next morning in Hollow Creek dawned gray and heavy with mist.
as if the town itself carried the weight of the fire and what it had revealed. The ruins of the Miller house were already cordoned off with yellow tape, but curious onlookers still gathered, whispering and pointing at the blackened skeleton that once stood tall. For them, the fire was another piece of gossip, but for Detective Aaron Blake, it was the start of something much deeper. He sat in his office, the diary lying open before him like a wound that refused to close. He had barely slept, his mind trapped in Emily Miller's words. He kept hearing her warning, "Someone in this house doesn't want me alive." The words gnawed at him. He had read hundreds of case files in his career, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about solving a cold case. This was about giving voice to a girl who had been silenced for 20 years. He poured himself another cup of bitter coffee, and began to read again, this time carefully, page by page. The early entries painted Emily as a lively, imaginative teenager. She described her school days in vivid detail, the friends she admired, the boys she secretly liked, the art projects she poured herself into. She loved drawing, and often sketched in the margins of her diary. Little flowers, faces and stars decorated her entry. But slowly, a darker undercurrent crept in. Her handwriting became tense, her words more guarded. "I feel like I'm not allowed to breathe in this house," one entry read. "Dad watches everything. Mom says nothing. And Alex, he's changing." Blake paused at that. Alex was Emily's younger brother. At the time of her disappearance, he had been a boy of 14. Now he would be 34, a grown man. The idea of him changing back then, becoming withdrawn or strange, could mean something important. Another entry chilled Blake even more. "They talk at night when they think I'm asleep. I don't understand everything, but I heard my name. I heard Dad say she knows too much. What do I know? What did I do?" The edges of the book were singed, whole portions unreadable, but the fragments that remained hinted at something poisonous inside that family. He reached for the old case files that had been delivered to his desk earlier. The reports were thin, a collection of interviews, missing persons alerts, and theories that led nowhere. Emily's father, Thomas Miller, had been a respected banker. Her mother, Margaret, was described as quiet, submissive, almost timid. Alex, the younger brother, had given little information at the time. The family had cooperated with the investigation on the surface, but no evidence tied them to wrongdoing. Within months, the case had gone cold. Blake picked up the phone and called an old colleague, Officer Daniels, who had been a rookie during the original investigation. Daniels's voice crackled with age and fatigue. "Emily Miller, after all these years," he said when Blake explained, "I'll tell you what I remember. That house, it always felt off. When we interviewed the family, the father kept answering everything, controlling the narrative. The mother hardly said a word, like she was scared to. And the boy, Alex, he just sat there staring at the floor. I always thought they were hiding something, but with no body, no crime scene, the chief wouldn't push it further." Blake's instincts sharpened. "Do you know where the Millers are now?" he asked. Daniels hesitated. "Last I heard, Thomas died a few years back. Heart attack. Margaret moved to live with relatives, I think. Alex, I don't know. He left town after his father died. Haven't seen him since." After hanging up, Blake stared again at the diary. If Thomas Miller was dead, then answers would have to come from Margaret or Alex. He made a note to track them down, but first he needed to understand the diary itself more deeply. That evening, he sat again with the fragile book under a brighter lamp. He flipped past the early innocent pages, until he reached a section where the handwriting became hurried, almost desperate. Emily wrote about a night when she thought someone had entered her room. "I woke up and the door was half open. I swear I saw someone standing there, but when I called out they slipped away. I thought it was Alex at first, but when I asked him in the morning, he denied it. I don't believe him." The next page had a drawing. Not a flower or a star, but a dark figure scribbled in the corner of the page, looming like a shadow. Beneath it, Emily had scrawled, "The one in the hall." Blake shivered. He'd seen similar notes in other cases, where victims sensed danger before anything happened. Many times they turned out to be right. The entries that followed grew increasingly fragmented. Emily wrote of hearing arguments behind her parents' bedroom door, of her father's angry voice, of her mother crying. Then there was the entry that seemed almost like a confession. I know now. I found the papers. I don't think they know I saw them, but if they do, the rest was burned. Words lost to ash. Blake leaned back, frustrated. What papers? What had Emily discovered? The diary had promised answers, but its damaged pages left him with more questions. He tapped his pen against the desk, deep in thought. If Emily had stumbled upon something dangerous, something her family wanted to keep hidden, then her disappearance wasn't a runaway case at all. It was silencing. The next morning, Blake drove out to visit the local archive office. He sifted through old property records, financial documents, anything connected to the Millers. He discovered that Thomas Miller had faced rumors of embezzlement at the bank he managed, though nothing was proven. There were whispers of secret accounts, money unaccounted for. Could Emily have found something related to that? A teenager, stumbling upon financial records, could explain the words she knows too much, but the pieces still didn't fit cleanly. He needed more. Later that day, Blake went back to the ruins of the Miller house one last time before it would be fully sealed off. The air still smelled of smoke and damp ash. As he picked carefully through the debris, his flashlight caught something half buried beneath a collapsed beam. He crouched and tugged it free. It was a small tin box, rusted but intact. Inside, to his surprise, were folded sheets of paper, slightly charred at the edges but legible. His hands tightened as he read them. They were letters, handwritten notes exchanged between Emily and someone identified only as Jay. The tone was tender, secretive. Emily wrote about wanting to escape Hollow Creek, about her fear of her father, about how Jay was the only one she could trust. One line made Blake pause. If they find out about us, it will be the end of me. There was Jay. A boyfriend, a friend, someone from school. Blake carefully placed the letters into an evidence bag. If Emily had been involved with someone her family disapproved of, it could have fueled conflict. Or maybe Jay had seen what happened to her. That night, Blake couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. As he left the precinct and walked toward his car, he noticed a figure standing across the street in the shadows. When he turned to look directly, the figure slipped away into the mist. He tightened his grip on the diary under his arm. Whoever had tried to destroy the house might not be finished yet. He drove home with his nerves on edge. Once inside, he locked the doors and poured himself a drink. Sitting again with the diary, he turned to the very last legible entry before the burned pages consumed the rest. The words were shaky, uneven. I'm meeting Jay tomorrow. I'll tell him everything I found. If Dad ever knows, I don't know what he'll do. Blake stared at the line until it blurred in front of his eyes. Emily had planned to confide in someone to share the secret she had uncovered, but she never got the chance. At that moment, the pieces began to form a dangerous outline. Emily had discovered something, possibly about her father. She feared for her safety. She planned to meet someone who might have been her only ally. And then she vanished. Blake felt the weight of it pressing on him. The fire that had consumed the Miller house wasn't just an accident. It was someone trying to bury all of this, 20 years too late. But the diary had survived, and with it, Emily's voice had returned. In the silence of his home, Blake whispered to himself, "She's still speaking. I just need to listen carefully." Far outside town, in a darkened motel room, a man sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a newspaper clipping about the fire. His face was older now, hardened by years, but his eyes were restless. On the nightstand beside him lay a lighter, the same kind used to set flames. He muttered under his breath, "It wasn't supposed to be found." Then he crushed the clipping in his fist. The diary was out in the open. The secrets were unraveling, and for the first time in 2 decades, Hollow Creek trembled on the edge of truth.
The morning sun broke through the mist, in pale streaks, yet Hollow Creek still felt smothered by a heaviness that wouldn't lift. Detective Aaron Blake arrived at the precinct early, the diary tucked in a protective evidence bag, on his desk. He had spent most of the night replaying Emily Miller's words, her trembling script, warning of danger, her fear of her father, her secrecy about someone she trusted, named only as J. The fire, the half-burned pages, the letters he found in the ruins. It was all pulling him deeper into a mystery that seemed to resist the light. He ordered coffee and began with the practical steps. He called up the old-school records from 20 years ago, searching for anyone with the initial J, yearbooks, class lists, and old attendance logs lay scattered across his desk. Names began to stand out. Jason Rivers, Emily's classmate, Julia Harper, her best friend, Jacob Wells, a boy she once partnered with on a science project. Each possibility was like a thread waiting to be pulled. As he scrolled through the digitized files, a knock came at his door. Officer Claire Bennett stepped inside, a sharp-minded junior detective eager to prove herself. "You asked me to run background on the Millers," she said, handing him a file. Blake skimmed through. Thomas Miller's finances had been murky. There were reports of unaccounted money, whispers of fraud. Margaret Miller, the mother, had no records beyond medical visits for anxiety and insomnia, and Alex Miller, now 34, had vanished from official sight around 10 years ago. No permanent address, no steady job, just traces of odd work across states. "Find him," Blake said firmly. Claire nodded, already anticipating the order. "I've got leads." A guy named Alex Miller was spotted working construction in Ridgeport a few years back. "I'll start there." Blake leaned back, staring at the diary. He could feel the weight of Emily's voice urging him onward. He needed to dig deeper into her circle of friends. So he drove out to visit someone who had lived across the street from the Millers back then. An elderly woman named Mrs. Cavan. She answered the door slowly, her frame frail but her eyes sharp with memory. "Yes, I remember Emily," she said softly after he explained his visit. "Sweet girl, always smiled when she walked past. But there was sadness in her eyes too. That house, it was not a happy place." "Did you ever see anything unusual around the time she disappeared?" Blake asked. Mrs. Kavanagh's lips trembled before she spoke. "The night before she went missing, I heard shouting from the house. A man's voice, angry. I thought it was Thomas, then silent. The next morning, they said Emily was gone. But I don't believe she just left. She loved this town too much. She loved her mother, despite everything. Did she have friends she confided in?" The old woman nodded. "She was always with Julia Harper, her closest friend. If Emily was keeping secrets, Julia would have known." Blake thanked her, and left with a sense of urgency. He looked up Julia Harper's records, and discovered she still lived in Hollow Creek, working as a librarian at the local school. By mid-afternoon, he was standing in front of the school library, watching her through the glass as she arranged books. She was in her late 30s now, her features softened with age, but still bearing traces of the girl she once was. When he introduced himself and mentioned Emily, Julia grew pale. "I haven't heard her name spoken aloud in years," she whispered, leading him to a quiet corner. "I still think about her. Every day." Julia, Blake began gently. "I found her diary. It survived the fire. She wrote about being scared in that house. And she mentioned someone she trusted. Someone with the initial J. Was it you?" Julia hesitated, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. "Yes, it was me. We were best friends. She used to call me Jay in her notes, so no one else would know. She told me things she wouldn't tell anyone else." "What things?" Blake pressed. Julia's voice trembled. She said her father was hiding something, that she found papers in his study about money. Money that wasn't supposed to be there. She thought it was illegal, but she didn't know what to do. She was scared.
She wanted to tell someone, but she was afraid her father would find out. She told me if anything happened to her, her diary would explain everything. Tears welled in her eyes. And then, she was gone. Blake felt a chill. The diary had hinted at secrets, but hearing Julia confirm it gave it new weight. Why didn't you come forward back then? I was 16, Julia whispered. Her father terrified me. After Emily disappeared, he warned everyone not to spread rumors. He said she had run away and if we cared about her we'd let it be. I was too afraid. Blake nodded. He couldn't blame a frightened teenager, but it meant Emily had been silenced, because she stumbled upon her father's corruption and perhaps more. As he left the library, a nagging thought struck him. If Julia was Jay, then who had Emily planned to meet the night she vanished? The diary entry had said, "I'm meeting Jay tomorrow. I'll tell him everything I found." That couldn't have been Julia. She already knew. Unless Emily had been planning to meet someone else entirely. And the burned pages had hidden the real initial. Back at the precinct, Claire reported progress. I tracked Alex Miller. He's living 2 towns over in an old trailer park. Keeps a low profile. Do you want me to bring him in? Blake shook his head. Not yet. I'll go to him. He might not talk in a formal setting. Let's see if he'll open up in his own space. That evening, Blake drove out to the trailer park. The sun dipped low, casting everything in a rusted glow. Alex's trailer was small, battered by time. Blake knocked, and after a moment, the door creaked open. Alex stood there, thin and weary looking, his eyes darting with unease. "Who are you?" he asked cautiously. "Detective Blake. I need to talk to you about your sister Emily." The name froze Alex in place. His jaw tightened, his hands fidgeted. After a long silence, he opened the door wider. Inside, the trailer smelled of stale smoke and loneliness. Blake sat opposite him. "Your sister's diary survived the fire. I've read it. She was scared. Alex. She felt watched. She thought someone in the house didn't want her alive. What do you know about that?" Alex looked away, his shoulders hunched. "I was just a kid. 14. I didn't understand everything, but I knew things weren't right. Dad. He was hiding stuff. He'd have meetings late at night with men I didn't know. Mom cried a lot. Emily used to sneak into his study. I think she found something she shouldn't have." "What happened the night she disappeared?" Blake asked firmly. Alex's voice cracked. "I don't know. I heard shouting. Emily screaming. Then, silence. The next morning, Dad said she ran away. He made us all say it too. He said if anyone asked, that's the story." I wanted to believe him, but his hands shook. "I don't think she ever left that house." Blake's blood ran cold. "Are you saying your father killed her?" Alex's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't know, but I think Mom knew, and she said nothing." The weight of his words settled heavily. Emily's body had never been found, but if Alex was right, the truth might still lie somewhere connected to that cursed house. As Blake drove back through the night, the mist rising from the fields, his headlights caught another car in the rearview mirror. It had been following him since the trailer park. He slowed down, changed lanes, even pulled into a gas station, but the car stayed back, watching. Only when he parked at the precinct did it finally turn away, disappearing into the darkness. Blake knew then that someone else was deeply invested in keeping the past buried. Someone who had been watching since the fire. Someone who might have lit it in the first place. When he returned to his desk, he opened the diary one more time. His eyes lingered on the half-burnt words. "If they find out, it will be the end of me." And in the silence of his office, he whispered, "Emily, I'm not stopping until I know the truth." Outside, in the quiet of Hollow Creek, the person who had followed him stood in the shadows of the precinct parking lot, smoking another cigarette, their face hidden by the glow of ember. They watched the building with cold patience, whispering to themselves, "He's digging too deep." The diary was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a fuse, and the fire it sparked was only beginning to spread. The wind had grown colder in Hollow Creek, carrying with it the scent of smoke that still lingered near the ruins of the Miller house. Detective Aaron Blake stood by his office window late into the night, staring at the reflection of his own tired face. He had pieced together fragments: Emily's diary, Julia's confession, Alex's haunted memories. But they were still fragments. The truth lay somewhere in the gaps, in the burned edges of those missing pages, and someone out there knew he was getting closer. He hadn't forgotten the car that followed him after meeting Alex, nor the figure he'd glimpsed outside the precinct. Whoever had started the fire hadn't expected the diary to survive. Now they were watching, waiting. Blake turned away from the window and sat at his desk. He spread out the evidence: the diary, the charred letters between Emily and Jay, the locket with her photo. He kept circling back to the last clear entry: "I'm meeting Jay tomorrow. I'll tell him everything I found." Julia claimed she was Jay, but Emily wouldn't need to secretly meet her closest friend. Julia already knew. That meant Emily was referring to someone else. Someone the burned pages had hidden from view. Whoever it was, they might have been the last person to see her alive. The next morning, Blake met Julia again at the library. She looked wary, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "You're sure Emily meant me when she wrote about meeting Jay?" he asked. Julia frowned. "She used the initial for me in casual notes." "Yeah, but now that you mention it, she didn't usually call me Jay when it was serious. She'd write my whole name." "Then maybe it wasn't you," Blake said quietly. "Maybe it was someone else with that initial." Julia hesitated. "There was one other person, Jason Riv. He was older than us, about 19. He worked part-time at the gas station. Emily liked talking to him. She once told me she trusted him more than anyone, but her father didn't approve. He said Jason was no good." Blake's pulse quickened. Jason Rivers. Another. If Emily had confided in him, if she had planned to meet him the night she disappeared, he could hold the missing piece. He tracked Jason down easily enough. Jason still lived in Hollow Creek, running an auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. The years had put lines on his face, but his eyes were sharp, suspicious. As Blake approached, "I'm not here about your shop," Blake said, flashing his badge. "It's about Emily Miller." Jason stiffened. He wiped his hands on a rag, his jaw tight. "I haven't heard that name in years." Blake studied him carefully. "She wrote about you in her diary. She trusted you, said she was meeting you the night she disappeared." Jason's eyes flickered, a storm of emotion beneath his guarded exterior. "She was supposed to meet me," he admitted slowly. "She told me she had something important to tell me. She was scared, said it was about her father. We planned to meet behind the old church, but she never showed up." "What did you do?" Blake pressed. "I waited for hours," Jason said bitterly. "Then I went to the Miller house. I saw the lights on, heard shouting inside. I wanted to help, but I was young, stupid. Her father hated me. If he saw me there, he would have had me arrested. So I left." His voice cracked. "And the next day she was gone. Everyone said she ran away, but I knew better." Blake leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell the police what you just told me?" Jason's fists clenched. "Because Thomas Miller threatened me. He came to my shop a few days later, told me if I spread lies he'd ruin my life. Said Emily was gone because she was unstable, and if I dragged his family's name through the mud, he'd make sure I paid for it. I was 19. Detective, I didn't have the guts to fight a man like him. I've regretted it every day since." Blake believed him. Jason's pain was raw, too real to fake, but it also confirmed something critical. Emily never made it to their meeting. Something happened to her inside that house before she could escape. That night, Blake returned to his apartment with his mind spinning. He pored over the diary again, reading Emily's words until they blurred in front of his eyes. He thought of her sitting in her room, scribbling in desperation, knowing her life was slipping out of her control. He thought of her planning to run, of trusting Jason to help, of being silenced before she could. But then a new thought struck him. If Thomas Miller had killed his daughter to protect his secrets, why destroy the house 20 years later? Why burn it down when the case had long gone cold? Unless someone else had hidden the diary there and the fire was meant to erase it before Blake could find it. The next day, Blake had the diary examined by forensic specialists. They confirmed something strange. The burn patterns on the pages didn't match the house fire entirely. Some pages looked scorched earlier, as if someone had tried to destroy them long before. The chest where the diary was found had protected it from the recent blaze, but someone had clearly attempted to erase parts of it years ago. That meant the diary hadn't simply survived. It had been deliberately hidden and preserved by someone who wanted it found later. Who? Blake's instinct screamed at him. Margaret Miller. The quiet, fragile mother. Was it possible she had hidden the diary after Emily disappeared, keeping it safe until someone might uncover the truth? If so, where was she now? He tracked her down to a nursing home in a neighboring town. By evening he was standing in a dimly lit room, staring at the frail figure of Margaret Miller lying in bed. Her eyes hollow but still aware. "Mrs. Miller," he said gently, sitting beside her. "I'm Detective Blake. I need to talk to you about Emily." Her lips trembled at the name, her hands twisting in the blanket. "Emily," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My sweet girl. She didn't run away, did she?" Blake asked softly. She was silenced. "You know what happened." Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks. "I tried to protect her. I told Thomas to stop, to let her go, but he wouldn't. He said she'd ruin everything, that she knew too much." "What happened that night?" Blake pressed, his heart pounding. Margaret's voice cracked. There was shouting. "He struck her. She fell." I screamed. Alex ran into the room, but Thomas ordered him out. I don't remember everything after that, just Emily's eyes. So frightened. And then, she was gone. Thomas told us to forget, to never speak of it again. He said, if I ever told he'd destroy Alex too. I believed him. Blake's chest tightened. "Did he kill her?" Margaret sobbed, turning her face away. "I don't know. He took her away that night. I never saw her again." Silence hung heavy in the room. Then Blake asked the final question. "Did you hide her diary?" Margaret's eyes flickered. "Yes, I found it in her room after she disappeared. Thomas tried to burn it, but I saved what I could. I hid it in the chest, in the floorboards of the house. I prayed someone would find it one day when he was gone. I couldn't tell the truth then, but maybe now it's time." Blake squeezed her trembling hand. "Thank you. You've done more for Emily than you know." That night, driving back, his thoughts were a storm. The pieces were falling into place. Emily had discovered her father's corruption, planned to escape with Jason's help, but never made it out of the house. Thomas silenced her, and Margaret hid the diary as the only testimony of her daughter's voice. Years later, someone burned the house, not realizing the diary still existed, but the question still lingered. Where was Emily's body? Blake knew the case was far from over. He needed to find where Thomas had taken her that night, somewhere in Hollow Creek. The final truth was waiting. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed something unusual. His front door was ajar, his stomach clenched. Gun drawn, he stepped inside. The lights were off, but the air felt disturbed. He moved cautiously through the rooms until he reached his desk. The diary was gone. In its place was a single note written in shaky letters. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like her." Blake's heart hammered as he stood in the silence of his violated home. Whoever had taken the diary wasn't just trying to protect old secrets. They were willing to kill to keep them buried. But Blake wasn't stopping. Not now. Not ever.
The night grew heavier as the investigators sat in the dimly lit police station, their tired faces glowing in the cold light of the fluorescent lamps. The diary, half burned and fragile, lay on the desk like a relic of secrets long buried, a puzzle that had held them captive for weeks. What remained of its pages was already shocking, but it was the last few fragments, the last words of the girl who had vanished 20 years ago, that had shaken everyone to the core. Her writing had changed in those final entries. The neat handwriting had become jagged, hurried, filled with fear. It was as if she had been racing against time, desperate to put something on paper before it was too late. And then it stopped abruptly, the charred edge cutting through the story like a knife. Detective Harris leaned forward, his fingers brushing over the words that remained visible. She knew, he muttered, half to himself, half to the others in the room. She discovered something terrible. He flipped through the damaged pages again, eyes narrowing on the last clear sentence. He is not who I thought he was. My own father. The rest of the page was blackened, unreadable, as if fire itself had conspired to silence her. But the implication was impossible to ignore. Could her father have been the one behind her disappearance? Had the girl been silenced because she learned the truth? The thought unsettled everyone. Families in small towns always carried whispers, but the father, once a respected man in the community, had died years ago. His name had never been publicly tied to the girl's disappearance, though rumors had floated around in hushed voices back then. Now, with this new evidence, everything pointed back to him. But Harris wasn't convinced it was that simple. People hide their sins well, he said quietly, but sometimes the worst monsters are the ones who wear the mask of love. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the burned house, the forensic team combed through ashes, searching for anything that could validate the girl's words. The charred remains of furniture, broken glass, and collapsed beams told the story of a fire too deliberate to be an accident. The cause was arson. Someone had wanted the past destroyed, and yet the diary had been found. That fact alone gnawed at Harris. If the fire was meant to erase evidence, why was the diary still there, buried but intact enough to be read? Was it carelessness or intention? As the detectives interviewed townspeople again, fragments of memories started to piece together a chilling image. One neighbor, an old woman with trembling hands, recalled hearing shouting on the night the girl vanished. It wasn't the first time, she said. That house was full of anger. You could hear it through the walls. I saw her once, standing outside with tears on her face, but when she noticed me, she just ran back inside. Others told of how the father was strict, controlling, and quick to anger. His word was law, and no one dared question him. But underneath their words, Harris sensed something darker, fear that lingered even after 2 decades. The father's shadow still haunted them. The diary became the key to unlocking those hidden fears. In one entry, the girl wrote about finding papers in her father's drawer, documents she didn't understand, but that made her uneasy. It felt wrong, she wrote, as if the man I live with is hiding something dangerous. In another entry, she described how her mother's behavior changed whenever her father entered the room. Her smile would vanish. Her voice would falter. She looked like a prisoner who couldn't escape. The girl noted these weren't just childish observations. They were glimpses into a household ruled by fear. The most haunting entry, however, was one written only days before she disappeared. I think I'm being watched, not just outside but inside this house. At night, I hear footsteps outside my room. When I open the door, there's no one there. But I know someone is standing in the shadows waiting for me to fall asleep. The words chilled everyone who read them. It was no longer just suspicion. It was terror. But what exactly had she discovered about her father? The half-burnt page suggested it was something unspeakable. The detectives began to dig into the father's past, pulling old records, financial documents, and employment histories. What they found was unsettling. There were gaps in his records, unexplained absences and unexplained sources of money. The more they uncovered, the more the respectable facade of the man began to crumble. He was not the upstanding citizen people had believed. There were whispers of connections with dangerous people, debts owed and secrets paid for in silence. Still, the case was tangled in contradiction. If the father was guilty, why had the truth taken so long to come to light? Why had the diary surfaced only now, decades after his death? And why had someone tried to burn it, yet left just enough intact to spark new questions? Harris felt as though he was being led, pulled along a path designed by someone who wanted the truth revealed, but only piece by piece. Late one night, as the team sifted through the ruins again,
A young officer uncovered something buried beneath the debris. A small rusted box, scorched but intact. Inside were scraps of photographs, burned around the edges, but still recognizable. One photo showed the girl with her father, both smiling stiffly. Another, more unsettling, showed the father, standing with men the investigators did not recognize. Hard-faced men with eyes that revealed no warmth. These were not family pictures. These were association. And in the corner of one photograph, almost hidden, the girl's terrified eyes stared back at the camera. It was as if she had been caught in a moment she wasn't supposed to see. The discovery deepened the mystery. It wasn't just a story of an abusive household. It was a web of secrets that stretched beyond the walls of that house. Harris began to wonder if the girl's father had been involved in something criminal. Something so dark that his own daughter's knowledge of it sealed her fate. And if that was true, then who else had been complicit in covering it up? The next step was to confront the surviving family members. The girl's younger brother, now a grown man, lived on the outskirts of town. He had never spoken much about the past, but when the detectives visited him, his reaction to the diary was immediate. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, and when he reached the final burnt entry, tears filled his eyes. I always knew something happened to her, but I was too scared to say anything. He confessed that their father had been harsh, violent at times, and that the house had been a prison for them all. But when asked directly if he believed his father had killed his sister, his silence was louder than words. His eyes said yes, even if his lips couldn't form it. Yet Harris remained cautious. Something about the whole case didn't sit right. If the father was the villain, then why the elaborate staging of the diary's reappearance? Who had hidden it all these years? And why bring it back now? Was it truly the voice of the dead girl reaching out? Or was someone alive manipulating her words to settle an old score? The deeper Harris looked, the clearer one thing became. The diary was not just a record of fear. It was bait, and someone had set the trap. The team realized that they had only touched the surface of the mystery. The next part of the diary, though destroyed, hinted at a secret too dangerous to stay buried. And if that secret was now coming to light, then the person responsible for protecting it all these years was still out there, watching, waiting, ready to strike again if necessary. The investigators stood at the edge of revelation, knowing that the past was about to bleed into the present. The girl's final words, though incomplete, echoed in their minds. My own father. But Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the diary was hiding another twist, one that would make the entire town question everything they thought they knew. And the fire, the photographs, the silence of those who survived, it all pointed to a truth darker than anyone had imagined. The ghost of the girl was no longer just a memory. She was speaking through ink and ash, demanding justice. The night had grown darker, heavy clouds hiding the pale moon, as if the sky itself wanted no part in what was about to be uncovered. The burned house stood in silence, its charred beams stretching upward like skeleton arms, pointing to the heavens in accusation. The ruins smelled of ash and old secrets, the kind that never truly die, only wait for the right moment to resurface. Inside those ruins, detectives now dug with renewed urgency. The half-burned diary had opened a door into a forgotten nightmare, and now there was no turning back. Detective Harris brushed soot from his jacket sleeve, the flashlight beam catching edges of blackened wood and collapsed plaster. His partner, Linda Martinez, crouched near a section of wall where the fire hadn't reached complete. She was running gloved fingers across the scorched bricks, when her hand stopped at something odd, a faint outline of metal embedded in the wall. Hold on, she whispered, motioning for Harris. They chipped away gently with small tools until a small metal box emerged, half melted, but still intact. It was hidden behind a false panel, something no firefighter or casual searcher would have ever noticed. Martinez cracked it open carefully. Inside, despite the years and the fire, there were fragments, letters folded, a broken necklace, and what looked like a blood-stained ribbon. Harris lifted one of the letters, its edges burned but words still visible. His eyes narrowed as he read aloud, "If you don't stop digging, they will kill you. Do not trust him. He smiles, but he is the one." The handwriting was unmistakably the same as the diaries. "This confirms it," Harris muttered. She knew someone close was plotting against her, but who was him? As they carried the box out into the open air, a figure lingered behind the yellow police tape, watching. An older woman, wrapped in a worn shawl, her face lined with decades of grief. Linda approached her gently, sensing the weight in her eyes. "Ma'am, were you connected to the family who lived here?" The woman hesitated before nodding. "I was their neighbor. I saw things I shouldn't have, and for 20 years, I kept my mouth shut. But if her diary has been found, maybe it's time I speak." Her voice trembled as she recalled the night the girl disappeared. She said she had heard arguing in the house, muffled at first, then screams that pierced the night. She had looked through her window and seen shadows moving in the upstairs room, but by the time she dared to come closer, the house was silent. The family told everyone the girl had run away. "But I never believed it," the woman whispered. "There was blood on the back porch. I saw it when the moonlight hit." And the father, his hands were shaking, when he carried something heavy out to the car that night. Harris and Martinez exchanged grim looks. For decades, suspicion had floated in the air, but without evidence it was buried. Now with the diary, the letters and this testimony, the picture was becoming sharper. Still, one question clawed at them both. Why had the diary suddenly resurfaced after so many years? They pressed further into the ruins over the following days, uncovering more fragments of the girl's life. Her necklace bore her initials, ER, and the broken clasps suggested it had been ripped off violently. The ribbon was soaked in old blood, dark brown with time. Forensic testing would take weeks, but they didn't need the results to know whose it was. Meanwhile, Linda traced down old police files, many of them poorly kept or deliberately vague. She discovered that the father, Richard Raines, had once been questioned, but released due to lack of evidence. The case was quietly closed within months, declared a voluntary disappearance. Too neat, too convenient. One evening, as Harris sat alone in his office, he spread out the diary pages in sequence. The burned gaps made the story jagged, but the pattern was clear. In the weeks before her vanishing, the girl had grown increasingly fearful. She wrote of footsteps outside her room at night, of whispered conversations that stopped when she entered the kitchen, of her father's eyes that seemed colder every day. Her last intact page mentioned she had uncovered something in his office drawer that proved his guilt, but the detail was lost in the burned hearth. The breakthrough came when Martinez dug into city archives. The old property deeds revealed something chilling. The father had taken out a large insurance policy, only weeks before the fire that eventually destroyed the house. And not just the house. On his own daughter, a life insurance policy under her name, signed and filed as if he expected her death. Harris nearly crushed the paper in his hands when he saw it. The neighbor's testimony grew bolder as she spoke again with detective. She admitted that she had seen Richard digging in the woods behind the property the day after the girl's disappearance. At the time, she told herself it was for gardening, but the memory had haunted her since. Guided by that tip, Harris and Martinez returned to the site. The woods loomed like dark sentinels, the soil damp with recent rain. They carried ground-penetrating radar equipments, sweeping in slow arcs. Hours dragged, but then the machine beeped sharply. A buried cavity. Their hands trembled as shovels struck wood. The rotted remains of a wooden chest. Inside, wrapped in decayed cloth, were bones, small bones, fragile, unmistakably human. The necklace clasp matched. The crime that had been buried with time was now unearthed in full. The girl had never run away. She had been silenced, her remains hidden only yards from the house, where she had lived her short, terrified life. But another question gnawed at Harris. If her remains were here all along, then who had hidden the diary? Who had returned it after 20 years? It couldn't have been the father. He had died 5 years earlier. Of a stroke. Was it the mother, still alive, but reclusive in a care home, or the brother, who had vanished to another state, and never spoken of his sister? Someone wanted the truth known, but not enough to come forward themselves. As the press swarmed the story, the town buzzed with rumors. Old acquaintances recalled the father's temper, the bruises the girl often hid, the way the mother always looked when asked about her daughter. Yet no one had dared accuse directly. Fear had silenced them all. One evening, as Harris left the precinct, a letter was slipped under his car's windshield. No signature, no address. Inside was a single line, written in shaky script. You found her body, but you haven't found the whole truth. Look closer at who lit the fire. The words chilled him to his core, because the fire that destroyed the house was never solved. It had been ruled accidental. But what if it wasn't? What if someone had set it deliberately, not to destroy the past, but to make sure it was finally uncovered? The case, instead of closing, had cracked open wider than ever, and somewhere, the person who had placed that diary back into the world was still watching, still waiting for the detectives to reach the final layer of the truth. The ruins of the house were no longer silent. They were speaking, louder than ever, and the secrets they whispered pointed not only to a father's crime, but to a betrayal that reached deeper than anyone had imagined. But Harris knew with a sick certainty that what lay ahead would shake everything apart, because if the letter was right, then someone who had been silent all these years had not only known the truth, but helped bury it, and that someone was still out there.
The morning sun did little to lift the weight of the discovery. The girl's remains, now confirmed by forensic tests, had shattered the town's illusions. For years, everyone had lived under a convenient lie that she had run away, maybe joined friends, maybe started over in some distant city. But the bones dug up in the earth behind her childhood home told the real story. She had never left. She had been silenced here, buried here, and the fire years later had nearly erased the evidence forever. Detective Harris stood by the crime scene photographs pinned on the wall. His tie loosened, eyes red from sleepless nights. The letter slipped under his windshield replayed in his mind. You found her body, but you haven't found the whole truth. Look closer at who lit the fire. The words gnawed at him. Whoever wrote it wasn't random. They knew details the public didn't. That meant one of two things. They were close to the family, or they were part of the cover-up. His partner Martinez entered with a fresh folder. I've been digging into the fire records again, she said. And Harris, it doesn't add up. The official report blamed faulty wiring. But look at this. Accelerant traces were found near the foundation. That's arson, plain and simple. And guess who signed off on ignoring it? She slid a document across the table. The name read, Detective Alan Moss. Harris stiffened. Moss had been the lead investigator 20 years ago. He had since retired, living comfortably in a lakefront house just outside town. A man with a spotless record, or so everyone thought. If he'd buried that report, Harris muttered, then he didn't just fail the case. He protected someone. Martinez leaned closer, lowering her voice. And maybe he wasn't protecting the father. The implication hung heavy. If the father had killed his daughter, who had set the fire years later to erase the evidence, Moss had no reason to protect a dead man. But he might have had a reason to shield someone still alive. That night, Harris drove out to Moss's home. The retired detective was older, slower, but sharpness still lingered in his eyes. He welcomed Harris with forced politeness, pouring 2 drinks. Neither of them touched. I know why you're here, Moss said flatly. The past has a way of clawing back, doesn't it? Harris didn't waste time. Why did you suppress the arson evidence? Who are you protecting? Moss sighed, leaning back. You think you're the first to ask? I did what I had to do. The truth wouldn't have saved that girl. It would have destroyed everyone else. Sometimes you bury a fire to stop it from spreading. His words were cryptic, evasive, but Harris caught the flicker in his eyes. When the brother's name came up, Ethan Raines, the girl's older brother, he had vanished not long after the tragedy, moving states away, never speaking of his sister. In the diary fragments, she had mentioned not trusting him. Harris had always assumed she meant her father. But what if she meant Ethan? The idea turned Harris's blood cold. A sibling, not a parent. That would explain the diary's strange warning. He smiles, but he is the one. A father could be cruel, violent, but the mask of a loving brother, that would be harder to suspect. Digging deeper into Ethan's life, Martinez uncovered troubling detail. He had lived under different names in different towns, never settling long. Arrest records hinted at violence, though charges were always dropped. And most telling of all, bank deposits from years ago, large sums, had been wired to him from an account linked to Moss. Blood money, Harris whispered as he read the files. Moss was protecting him, paying him to stay gone. It was a sickening revelation. The father may have been abusive, but the killing blow hadn't been his. It was Ethan. Perhaps an argument turned violent, perhaps jealousy or rage. The girl had threatened to reveal something she found in his possession, something incriminating. In a moment of fury, he had ended her life. The father had likely helped bury the truth, perhaps out of shame or twisted loyalty. But Ethan had carried the guilt in silence. And then years later, the fire. Harris pieced it together. Ethan had returned, or perhaps never truly left. He torched the house, either to erase what remained, or to ensure that when the ruins were searched, only fragments just enough would surface. But if he wanted the past gone, why plant the diary again now? Unless it wasn't him. Martinez suggested another angle. What if it wasn't Ethan who left the diary? What if someone else wanted us to look at him? Maybe Moss, maybe the mother, someone pulling the string. They needed answers, and only Ethan could provide them. Tracking him wasn't easy, but eventually Harris found him in a rundown motel 3 states over, living under yet another alias. When they knocked on the door, Ethan looked almost relieved, as though he had been waiting. In the interrogation room, his composure cracked quickly. He didn't deny knowing what happened. His hands trembled as he spoke. She was going to tell. She had proof letters, maybe photos I don't even know. She said she'd go to the police about me, about what I'd done. I begged her not. She wouldn't stop. I didn't mean to, but I pushed too hard, and she hit the floor. She wasn't breathing. I panicked. Dad helped me hide it. He told everyone she ran away. And Moss, he made sure the law didn't look too close. His voice broke. I've been carrying her ghost ever since. The confession was enough to close the case on the murder, but it didn't explain the fire, or the diary's reappearance. Harris pressed him hard. Ethan shook his head. I never went back. I couldn't face that place again. So who had lit the fire? Who had placed the diary? The last piece fell into place. When they visited the mother in her care home, she was frail, her mind wandering, but when shown the diary, her eyes welled with tears. I saved what I could, she whispered. I knew one day someone would come looking. I couldn't stop what happened, but I could leave a trail. It was her. She had hidden the diary after the murder, terrified of her husband and son, but unwilling to let the truth be completely erased. Years later, when the house was slated for demolition, she returned and set the fire, not to hide, but to reveal. Firefighters would search the ruins. Investigators would come again. The past would refuse to stay buried. Her mind had grown fragile, but the clarity of her guilt was sharp. She had lived all these years with the knowledge of her husband's complicity, her son's crime, her silence. In her own desperate way, she had forced the truth into the open, even if it took decades. The case ended with Ethan behind bars, Moss disgraced, and the mother fading in her final years with the weight of what she had done. The town, once content with its myth of a runaway, now had to face the truth. A girl betrayed not only by her father and brother, but by the silence of everyone around her. Harris and Martinez closed the files. One late evening, the office quiet. Harris stared at the photo of the girl, her smile frozen in time.
innocent and unknowing of the fate that awaited her. Justice took 20 years, he murmured. But it came. Martinez, though, wasn't convinced. Justice. Maybe, but Pete, I'm not sure she or anyone ever really got that. Outside, the town carried on. People walking, laughing, living. But beneath the surface, the story lingered. A reminder that the dead never stay buried forever, and that even the most carefully hidden crimes will, one day, claw their way back into the light. The diary, charred and fragile, now rested in an evidence box. Its final words, though incomplete, carried more weight than ever. The truth will burn its way out, and it had. And that, my friends, is where the diary closes. A house that was once nothing more than ashes and ruin gave back its secret. A girl who had been silenced 20 years ago finally found her voice. The truth took 2 decades to crawl out of the shadows, but in the end, it came out unshakable and raw. Evil can hide for years, but it cannot erase what really happened. Someone always remembers. A page always survives. And sooner or later, the past returns demanding justice. If you were captivated by this story, make sure to subscribe to The Crimson Truth, where every tale pulls you deeper into mystery, crime, and the chilling corners of human nature. New stories are waiting, and each one holds a secret you won't see coming. Stay curious, stay brave, and until the next story, remember, the truth always has a way of finding you.